across the country because of this situation.
Understandable. Thank you very much. Sam Ford reporting to us live from Reagan National. We have another eyewitness on the phone right now. His name is Charles Tanner. Mr. Tanner,
yes,
tell us what you saw.
I was in the, I live at the Overlook Apartments, and I was doing some exercises, jump roping, and this plane came increasingly fast, almost close enough to, if it headed this direction, hit the building that I'm in, which is an 8-story building, but it was aiming for the, in the direction of the Pentagon, and then all of a sudden I see this puff of smoke, and I just ran over to Columbia
so you didn't actually
to get a better view of it.
So, Charles, you didn't actually see it hit. You just saw it to a point, and then you saw the smoke?
I just saw this plane coming very, very fast, going in that direction as I was listening to you guys talk about what happened at the World Trade Center.
And where you live, obviously, it's close enough to Reagan National, but that's not a type of flight path you normally see.
Right. Well, I'm closer to the Pentagon than to Reagan National.
Okay, but obviously planes flying over there on a daily basis.
This is usually not the flight path of any aircraft.
Mr. Tanner, we do have more information about exactly where that plane crashed. We understand right now from the AP that it crashed near a helicopter landing pad near the Pentagon. So as far as we know, it didn't crash directly into the Pentagon. From where you are, Mr. Tanner, are you okay? Are you safe?
Well, unless, of course, the plane decides to hit this building, yes, I think I'm very safe.
Can you believe that this is happening in Washington, D.C., Mr. Tanner?
I want to say yes and no, okay, because of different terrorist activities and things of that nature, and because of what happened at the World Trade Center, I would say that it doesn't surprise me. I'm just a little shaken that it has happened.
And I'm not sure when we talk about that helicopter pad, if it's the one that's on the west side where you drive by all the time on the main street, that you can see if there's another one there as well that a lot of folks go by there on a daily basis.
We quickly want to recap before we return it to ABC News. The State Department has now been evacuated. The White House has been evacuated. The Capitol has been evacuated. There was a credible threat to the mansion, which I'm talking about the White House here, and so the entire White House has now been evacuated.
Of course, this all started in New York about 8:40. We want to go back to ABC News and allow them to continue their coverage of this entire and unbelievable incident that's going on. I'm Don Hudson along with Carol Costello. We send it now back to ABC News.
Just before 9 o'clock, and the second one was after that. And John Miller, you're listening.
Actually, it's interesting. There's no way to characterize any part of this as fortunate, but if you look at cities who are prepared to handle an incident like this, and as you've seen New York's emergency response to this, it is probably one of the few places that is prepared with the kind of equipment, response, and rescue efforts that could actually address something like this. And Washington is probably the other. Immediately when this happened, the entire emergency service unit, which comprises hundreds of specially trained cops, was mobilized to the scene. Now a triage center for the injured has been set up just around the corner from the World Trade Center. It's an incredible scene down there with a tremendous amount of equipment.
The Federal Aviation Administration has actually gone even further than it did a few minutes ago. It was asking all planes not to take off. Now the FAA has ordered all aircraft currently in the air over the United States to land at the nearest airport. Now you can imagine what may be happening, or what they think might be happening in some part of the country, that there is somebody else on some aircraft coming from somewhere or going somewhere with evil intentions, and so all aircraft currently in the air over the United States have been ordered to land at the nearest airport.
I think
Hang on just a sec, Don. I just want to check one thing, because one of the very first people the President talked to was the director of the FBI, and Pierre Thomas, who covers the Justice Department and the FBI for us, has been here. They may think they prepare for this kind of thing, Pierre, but man, it must have been a shock.
Stunning shock. The FBI Special Operations Center is now in full alert. The FBI extremely concerned that there would be additional attacks. Normally when you have a situation like this, they immediately get on the line with the CIA, the various intelligence agencies, trying to get a sense of who might have been planning something. But right now, the first order of business is to protect against a second attack, third attack. The feeling is normally when you have this kind of situation, there will be more attacks almost immediately.
Let's go to the trade tower again, because, John, we now have what do we have? We don't...
Wow. It looks like a new plume, a new large plume of smoke.
Now, it may be that something fell off the building. It may be that something has fallen. We don't know, to be perfectly honest. But that is what you're looking at, is the current. That's the scene at this moment at the World Trade Center. Dan Daler from ABC's Good Morning America is down in the general vicinity. Dan, can you tell us what has just happened?
Yes, Peter, it's Don Daler down here. I'm 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
That should be it.
It
Thanks
has
very much, Dan.
completely collapsed.
The whole side has
The
collapsed?
whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
That's the southern tower you're talking
Exactly. The second building that we witnessed the airplane enter had been, the top half had been fully involved in flame. It just collapsed. There is panic on the streets. Thousands of people running up Church Street, which is what I'm looking out on, trying to get away. But the entire, at least as far as I can see, the top half of the building, at least half of it, I can't see below that, half of it just started with a gigantic rumble, folded in on itself, and collapsed in a huge plume of smoke and dust.
We're talking about massive casualties here at the moment, and we have, whew, that is extraordinary.
There is panic on the streets. There are people screaming and running from the site. The gigantic plume of smoke has reached me, and I'm probably a quarter of a mile north of there.
Peter.
Now this is what it looked like moments ago. My God. The southern tower, 10 o'clock Eastern time this morning, just collapsing on itself. This is a place where thousands of people work. We have no idea what caused this. If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
Peter?
Yes, Dan.
What appeared to happen from my vantage point, the top part of the building was totally involved in fire, and there appeared to be no effort possible to put that fire out. It looked like the top part of the building was so weakened by the fire that the weight of it collapsed the rest of the building. That's what appeared to happen. I did not see anything happening at the base of the building. It all appeared to start at the top and then just collapse the rest of the building by the sheer weight of the top. There was no explosion or anything at the base part of it, but I did see that the top part of it started to collapse. The walls started to bulge out, bricks, glass things coming out, and then it collapsed in on itself, and it appeared to just fold down from there, from the very top.
Thanks, Don, very much. Just looking at that, I don't know why, but when was the last time the United States was attacked in this fashion? It was Pearl Harbor in 1941. John?
From the scene now, there's obviously massive casualties. Usually during these things, there's a little bit of a high pitch, but basic calm over the police radios among the emergency workers. I can hear them screaming, signal 1013, which is the police code for help, calling for help at the triage center, where other people who were already injured have been injured more, confirming that the building has collapsed. Dozens of officers, more civilians are injured. And we don't know, although I'd have to suggest, given the size of that building, what progress the evacuation was in of the tower that collapsed.
Yes, Pierre Thomas.
One thing I might add is that in recent years, the U.S. government has been preparing for massive attacks, but it's been primarily focused on biological, often bombing attacks. One of the things I have not heard discussed at all in government circles is the notion that someone would hijack a plane and perhaps flying into a building. So one of the questions that I'm sure that will come out of this, if this indeed is a terrorist attack, is what kind of defenses did the U.S. have in place to deal with an event like this?
Well, we talked about that even, Pierre, just before you came and joined us, because at the Emergency Management Center, which is just literally in the same complex as the trade towers, they talk at great length about their preparations for a biological, a chemical warfare attack, how they closed tunnels. I mean, they've been very efficient, taken it very seriously for many years. I'd be a little surprised if the notion of an airborne attack on a United States target had not been discussed. But the notion of the intelligence services knowing absolutely nothing of what is going on today and saying openly right away they had no warnings whatsoever is, and you say something very important, if this is a terrorist attack. We just keep saying that in a repeated basis. Not having any notion whatsoever of what's going on is to be reminded not only of the efficiency of terrorism, but just reminded the efficiency of terrorism at this point.
It's ironic. There's a chilling story. Lou Shalero of the FBI, who was part of the capture of Ramzi Youssef, who was the mastermind of the last bombing of the World Trade Center, told me this story, that he was flying over the World Trade Center in a helicopter with the suspect Ramzi Youssef next to him after he was captured in Pakistan. And as they passed over, Lou Shalero nudged him and said to Ramzi Youssef, you see, it's still standing. And Ramzi Youssef smiled and said to the FBI's assistant director, it wouldn't be if I'd had more money. This was...
In other words, more money to buy explosives, more money to run a more efficient operation than the one he ran from New Jersey in '93.
Exactly. And I mean, we may have seen the second coming of that plan.
John McWethy is on the phone at the Pentagon. Hold it, let me just... John McWethy, we've now heard reports that 3 planes have been hijacked today. Can you confirm that? Jack McWethy at the Pentagon? Okay, then let me go quickly to someone named Don Wright, who saw the plane crash into the Pentagon. Don, are you there in Washington?
Yes, I am.
Can you tell us what happened?
Yes, it was about 9:35, and I was looking out our 12th floor windows at 1600 Wilson Boulevard in Rosslyn, Virginia, and I watched this. It looked like a commuter plane, 2-engine, come down from the south, real low, proceed right on, and crashed right into the Pentagon.
Went directly into the Pentagon?
That is correct.
Looked like a deliberate act?
A deliberate act, sir.
And can you tell me what direction it came from, Don?
It came from the south.
Came from the south, up along the river, across the land?
It came from the south.
Okay, and did you happen to look at your watch? We thought it was just a little bit before 10 o'clock.
Well, I was watching ABC News, watching the Twin Tower, and about the time I saw the plane, I watched it come in very low over the trees, and it just dipped down, came down right over 395, right into the Pentagon.
And are you fairly sure that it was what we sometimes describe and recognize as a small commuter plane?
Yes, it was.
Good, Don. Thank you very much. Appreciate your help.
You're
Don
very
Wright,
welcome.
an eyewitness to the crash at the Pentagon. Now, we have had, as I said, reports today. There are hundreds of reports flying around, and so we beg your indulgence on us saying as often as we do, these are reports. They're sometimes unconfirmed. They're sometimes confirmed. We'll try to make it absolutely clear what we absolutely know and what we're uncertain about. There are now reports around of 3 aircraft having been hijacked today. So we have at least, because we've now had eyewitnesses to 3 apparently deliberate aerial assaults involving the aircraft themselves, 2 on the trade towers in New York City and 1 on the Pentagon itself, just described by Don Wright as a small 2-engine commuter plane which came up from the south. And we now believe that 3 planes were hijacked, 2 of them from Boston and 1 from somewhere else. We are not yet sure precisely what's happened. John, you're listening. Just to clarify for people, John, who's one of our leading reporters on crime, knows New York City probably better than anybody in many news divisions. I cannot tell you where that happens. That's either U.S. Air Force or Navy aircraft, fighter aircraft, now on patrol in what we've described as the no-fly zone over New York City today, lest there be one more attempt. John, go ahead.
They've continued evacuations in the area now. They're evacuating Battery Park City, which is a large apartment complex taking up many blocks across the street from the World Trade Center. And they've evacuated the federal court buildings where the terrorism trials of Ramzi Youssef and others were held. Anything that could be a symbolic target is now being emptied out in New York. New York is going into kind of a lockdown mode. I think you'll also see in Washington the same kind of air patrols have been scrambled around principal buildings there.
Okay. We have on the phone one of those people who makes his living analyzing terrorism. Kyle Olson, do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
I wonder if on a day like this anybody wants to be thought of as an expert on terrorism. Be that as it may, and assuming that, knowing that much of the country is shocked at the apparent breadth of this, are you?
Well, you know, this is the kind of attack that has fallen more into Tom Clancy novels than into actual response planning. Having said that, we've been anticipating for a long time. We've wondered why it's been so relatively quiet. The suggestions of Osama bin Laden's involvement. What has he been doing since Cole? Other groups out there with a real or imagined grudge against the United States. The nature of the event is shocking. The fact that it's happened is not.
Thank you very much, Kyle. Really appreciate it. Kyle Olson.
Yeah, one quick thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
One quick thing. The suggestions that are floating around out there right now. There's apparently this claim from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine.
Right.
Very interesting to note. If this is legitimate, if this claim stands up, this appears to be the first time this group has targeted Americans. This group has primarily steered away from the more extreme end of the violence scale. They focused less on suicide bombings, more on gun attacks and that sort of thing in the territories against Israelis.
Well, if
this holds up, this is a very different tactic.
Well, if it is true, and of course the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine was very much involved in attacking aircraft in the 1970s, which carried Americans. So certainly let's accept your notion that it's a recent attack on Americans. Thank you, Kyle, very much.
You bet.
As Mr. Olson makes clear, there has been at least one claim, and those of us who cover this for a very long period of time are always suspicious of claims. People who cover international terrorism. I'm going to interrupt myself. Linda Douglas, our Capitol Hill correspondent, I think is on the phone, and if she's not, she already reports there has been an explosion of some kind at the Capitol. Is Linda Douglas on the telephone? Let's get her on the phone as quickly as we have. She just reported a couple of minutes ago that the leaders of the Congress, Senator Lott, Senator Daschle, the Republican and Democratic leaders in the Senate, had been taken to some undisclosed secure location. Our general assumption is that there's no panic involved in this, that somebody in the Capitol building, as someone in the White House, has a book which says that when these things happen, here, Thomas, maybe you can confirm this for me, when these things happen, there are certain modalities which you behave, and as you see the hierarchy of the American political establishment, the military establishment being attacked, you want to protect the chain of command.
Absolutely. The first thing they try to do is get everyone in secure positions so they can gather information and make decisions about what to do next. One of the things that law enforcement officials had been planning for is the notion of a multi-tiered attack. An attack occurring in multiple places simultaneously. Because one of the things they've talked about is that terrorists want to project more fear, as much fear as possible. And one of the ways you can do it is to have this notion that attacks are happening on multiple fronts.
Yeah, well, and we've never seen anything like this before in the United States, of course. And in fact, not seen anything like this in my recollection. I've been doing this for 30-some-odd years. I don't recall any multitude of attacks. We've had 2 or 3. We've had 2 suicide bombers in a short period of time in the Middle East. We had the 2 embassies in Africa, in Kenya and in Tanzania, the attack 2 summers ago in the United States. But the notion that that terrorists, either an organization or organizations, plural, should be able to mount a concerted effort against the United States in this way, causing in this instance so many casualties, in the instance of the trade tower certainly so many casualties, is going to astound people in the political and military and intelligence establishment.
Absolutely. The notion that you could have multiple attacks like this, they had been planning for it, they had not seen it This is a extraordinary escalation, one that they were predicting would happen, but no one would think that would happen this quickly.
Okay, John Miller?
I think...
Let me just interrupt. I
sure.
apologize again. We're now looking at a helicopter over the Pentagon. That makes perfect sense this morning. But given the fact that we're all sensitive to the presence of any aircraft, that was a helicopter that just flew across the screen. That is, and as we had at least one eyewitness said this was an attack on the Pentagon from the south. He described it quite confidently as resembling a commuter aircraft, which is to say smaller than a small private aircraft and not as large as a commercial jet. It may have been a prop jet. It may have been a jet, but it's a smaller version of the jets which so many people in so many middle-sized American cities are now accustomed to seeing.
In terms of the realm of terrorism, this is going to be a real first test, literally by fire, for the Bush administration. You recall, after the embassy bombings in East Africa, the Clinton administration waited about 10 days and launched a missile attack against the camps of Osama bin Laden, who they felt confident at that time they could say was responsible for it, and who's since been charged in it. In this case, I think this ratchets up.
Excuse me. This is the Pentagon we're looking at now, according to my monitor. And again, it is hard to grasp what part of the building. We do not know if they're in the courtyard or outside, but you can see that a fairly considerable amount of damage has been done. We do not know whether these are offices or storage areas. The Pentagon is full of many thousands of people every day. The Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, has been saying only yesterday and today that he wants to reduce the bloatedness, as he put it, as he alluded to it in the military and the bureaucracy. But this is the great home of the military bureaucratic establishment. John, before I come back to you, Dennis Cross is on the phone. Dennis, do you hear me? Dennis Cross, do you hear me?
Yes, I can, Peter.
Dennis, I understand that you were in the World Trade Center when either this or these attacks occurred. Am I correct?
That's correct. It was, I guess it was slightly before 9 o'clock, and I work on the 36th floor in One World Trade Center. I work in the insurance industry. Probably hundreds of people in my industry in both of these two buildings.
And what happened?
As I was...
Hey, Dennis, just let me stop for a second. Somebody is trying another telephone on this line. Could they please not do that while we listen to Mr. Cross? Thanks. Go ahead, Mr. Cross. Go ahead, Dennis.
Essentially, I was, sort of at my desk working, general office activity, and felt an enormous... it almost felt like an earthquake. Like I could literally feel and see things in the office moving and the floor moving. Immediately after it was some sort of explosion or something, there was an enormous volume of debris and paper. It almost looked like a dirty parade. All of this material just falling down. I was looking out the south side of One World Trade, and everybody in the office was kind of screaming, kind of gathering in the middle, and I went to the window, and I immediately saw one woman who appeared to be motionless, laying on the roof of a lower building next to me. At that point, everybody started to gather their things. They were trying to evacuate people down the stairwell.
Did the electricity go out in the building?
The lights flickered a couple of times, and then it was weird. It was kind of like there was one sort of rush, and then shortly after that, there was another one. I don't know if it was maybe the other tower or if it were elevators in the inside, sort of just dropping to the floor.
Are you aware that one of the Twin Trade Towers has now collapsed on itself?
Yeah, I'm about probably 5 blocks from there on the corner of Greenwich and Warren.
And as we looked at it on the screen here, Dennis, we could see the smoke from this collapse just sweep, billow forward through the lower blocks of Manhattan. Did you have a sense of that?
Completely. I was at that point. I'm a little bit northwest, certainly north, maybe to the west side of Tower 1, and I was trying to get to Broadway. My wife works on the other side of downtown here, and I'm still trying to get there. But the smoke, I couldn't see. It was a wall of smoke, and if you were in it, you couldn't see. If you were out of it, you could just see the wall of smoke. It was
how
never
difficult?
Seen anything.
I'm sorry for interrupting. How difficult was the evacuation?
I'm sorry, say that again, Peter?
How difficult was it to evacuate the building from at least from the 30? There were 110 stories in the building.
I would say that it wasn't wasn't extremely difficult. It was just slow going down a somewhat narrow stairwell.
With
And
light,
if there was any sort of people who weren't able to move quickly, then it literally slowed down or stopped everybody. I was on 36, so it wasn't too terrible. When I got down to the 15th or 12th floor or so, there was water coming in from the doors, kind of at our feet level. And then it just was a waterfall down continually down all of the stairs, probably, in some cases 3-4 inches deep. At that, sirens and alarms were going off, and then people started to get a little frantic there.
Dennis, thank you very much.
Okay,
I really appreciate you calling in.
You're very
Dennis
welcome.
Krause, who works or did work on the 36th floor of the World Trade Center in this particular tower, which is still standing. There's only one of the trade towers now standing, the other having collapsed on itself not long ago. All of the federal office buildings in Washington have now been evacuated. All federal buildings in Washington have now been evacuated. All aircraft in the skies over the United States have been ordered to land at the nearest airport. All aircraft on the ground intending to go anywhere have been ordered not to take off. Because the country, this is the Pentagon, because we've just seen a moment ago that at least one portion of one side or building at the Pentagon itself has actually collapsed. And as we warned you, the whole business of responsibility, claiming of and naming responsibility would be complicated. And now we've, from the Middle East, a senior official from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine has denied any involvement, any connection to a double plane crash on the World Trade Center. It was, in fact, earlier on an anonymous caller who had called Abu Dhabi Television to say that the DFLP was responsible. So for today, we'll put aside as best we can trying to understand who did it, just knowing somebody who did it. Now, one of the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center was as we said some while ago, American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles. That has now been confirmed by the airline itself, or at least by their spokesperson, Lori Bassani. It was a Boeing 767. It would, under normal circumstances, if it were full, carry about 160 passengers, including 2 pilots, 9 or 10 crew, but we have no idea yet whether or not the plane was heavily loaded or not.
Peter, big concern now from the scene that the Northwest Tower, the one remaining standing, is leaning and buckling in the northwest corner. They're moving back the mobilization areas, and they're cordoning off the area in a much wider zone now, because obviously they are now concerned about the possibility of a second collapse.
I'm still desperately confused, John, about what may have caused the building to collapse.
As you watched the videotape, it appeared to buckle from the middle, from the point of impact and collapse, which, with no background in architecture, I don't know about the structural vulnerability, but as you see, debris starts to fall away. Then it cracks, and then it just goes straight down. And now they say that the other tower is leaning. If you look at some of the pictures, it appears to be on a slight angle to the right. Yeah, they say the fire is also spreading downward now through the tower. And I think there's a real decision to make there. I have not been able to hear whether they're keeping people in there to fight that fire, or they're just leaving it empty to let the fire burn itself out, because they're going to have a real problem with people in there if it's in jeopardy.
At the same time, New York firefighters have a reputation of staying until the very end, and if there are civilians in that building which need to be rescued, and clearly there are, then there's no way the emergency services, I can imagine, are going to pull out at this point.
And if the elevators are disabled from that height, there's no fast way out.
Precisely. 110 stories down, and this appears to have occurred. This occurred about 2/3 of the way up. ABC's John McWethy now confirms for us. We've had from an eyewitness, or he adds to our eyewitness, saying that a small plane heading north, which is exactly what our eyewitness a little earlier told us, exploded at the base of the Pentagon, at the base of one wing of the Pentagon. They evacuated everyone inside, and there was subsequent concern, which may have led to the FAA decision to ground everything, that there was concern that another plane might be inbound towards the Pentagon. And by grounding everything, of course, by ordering everything to be grounded on all radio channels to all aircraft that are flying in the area, it puts the military, Pierre Thomas confirmed for me, it puts the military in a position to take aggressive action, as the White House did when other aircraft have come close in the past.
Absolutely, absolutely. What it allows them to do is to get a better sense of incoming. If you're ordering everything down, you're essentially clearing the sky so the Pentagon can see what's coming in. Another question that they have to look at here is whether any of these planes might have been laced with explosives to cause the additional collateral damage once the impact occurred.
Yeah, these in every instance, well, I shouldn't say in every instance, certainly in the instance of the Pentagon, it looks more than a single aircraft just exploding on the ground. But again, we don't know precisely the size of the aircraft. We won't speculate on that. But Lisa Stark, who covers aviation for us, confirms that it was American Flight 11 to Los Angeles. There were 90 passengers and crew on board. And there was a second plane. Help me understand this now. So we believe that the two aircraft have flown into the trade towers. Both belonged to American Airlines. And they had both been hijacked. And there were 90 passengers and crew on the first plane and 60 passengers and crew on the second plane. That is if there's any doubt about that, someone please contradict me, but that is the report I am getting from our people who cover the Federal Aviation Administration and air travel in general, that there were two aircraft hijacked for this attack on the twin trade towers, now the single trade tower in New York City. And on the first, they were both flights to the West Coast from Boston. And the first one had 90 people and a crew on board. And the second had 60 passengers and crew on board. I beg your pardon. The second plane was not hijacked from Boston, but from Dulles Airport, we're being told, which of course is outside Washington. And we do not know if that was the... I'm going to make this absolutely clear because this reporting gets muggy. We've now reports of two planes from American Airlines, one from Boston, Flight 11 to Los Angeles, which we believe is one of the aircraft that went into the trade towers. We have a second plane, American Airlines Dulles to Los Angeles, with 60 passengers and crew, and that is certainly bigger than a small commuter aircraft, so it may also have been involved in the near thing. We'll do our best to hand that down as well. Senior law enforcement officials in Washington now tell us that a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department. That's it's a report now from the Associated Press, about to confirm it with our own people at the State Department, though everybody in Washington has been evacuated from their buildings. But a car bomb has now exploded outside the State Department. And John Miller, I see you writing quite frantically on something else.
It's at the scene now at the World Trade Center because of the concerns of the structural stability of the remaining tower. A temporary headquarters mobilization point triage center was set up at Stuyvesant High School, which is about 2.5 blocks up and slightly across the street. Now the concern is that if the building falls, if the second building falls, that it will be falling in that direction. So they are now evacuating their own command post and triage center, and they have to find an even further zone to move that to. Something that is striking about this today is that this is indicative of, with a car bomb at the State Department, a plane crash into the Pentagon, two planes designated to crash into each tower of the World Trade Center, bringing one down. It connotes the level of planning and sophistication and extreme logistical ability that probably makes this singularly the largest, most well-coordinated act of terrorism, not just in U.S. history, but probably
certainly in modern times.
In modern times.
Yeah,
unprecedented.
And every time you say that, I'm going to go immediately to Washington now, but every time you say that, I keep thinking of how we are told time and time and time again by the Pentagon and by the State Department that they know something's going on in the world today.
They seem to have the problem at the North Tower, Peter.
Let's look at the North Tower quickly.
Seems to be coming down.
Oh my God.
The second tower.
It's hard to put it into words, and maybe one doesn't need to. Both trade towers, where thousands of people work, on this day, Tuesday, have now been attacked and destroyed, with thousands of people either in them or in the immediate area adjacent to them. There is simply no way to accurately describe the emotion this evokes in people all over the world, friends of the United States and enemies of the United States as well. John Miller, very briefly, you said to us just a few minutes ago that this was their concern, that they thought after the first tower went that the second one was vulnerable.
There was constant intelligence that terrorist organizations, and specifically that financed by Osama bin Laden, was trying to mount another series of attacks against the United States. Of course, they thought of the symbolic targets. The most symbolic was the World Trade Center because it had been attacked yet not brought down. And it seems that those concerns that even caused the World Trade Center to hire a senior FBI counterterrorism official just weeks ago to try and beef up security have come home to roost. It's also interesting to say that there is no type of security
which would have prevented against this today. Well,
Nothing.
that may not. I'm going to say that may not altogether be true, because security operates in waves and concentric circles out around the world. Now we've lost the picture from there, so now we have it again. Well, wherever you are in the United States or in the world today, the landscape of New York City has just been changed. And one has to assume that thousands of lives have been extinguished. And it may be presumptuous to say thousands, but thousands of people work in these buildings, and given the difficulties of evacuating these buildings, where, as we've said several times, the elevators may not have been operating, and were not operating in at least one tower, tower number 2, the first one which is to go. That is the second attack on the southern tower, the first higher on this end of town, but both those towers have now gone. And here's a picture that doesn't exist anymore, because that's not a live picture anymore. Good Lord, it just... Now, can I ask where this picture is from? Do we know where this is? This is
outside the World Trade Center. The sign indicates the approach to the
Brooklyn Bridge. To the Brooklyn Bridge. So we're
on West Street, approximately just north of Vesey Street there.
And you can see the dust and debris. And this is I don't know if this is at an early stage or whether this is right now. It's at an early stage, because there in the distance you can see at least one of the towers still standing as people wander, many of them dazed. And look at the cell phones in their ears. This is, in a cell phone society, and it's certainly true in the Middle East, people on their cell phones all the time, seeking and offering reassurance to their families and their friends that something has happened. In Israel, and at least those who have them in the Palestinian territories these days, there's constant traffic on the cell phones, because there is such tension in the region, and such tension here today, which is extraordinary, that people wanting everywhere to reassure or find out about what has happened to those who are near and dear to them.
One thing we should update for people listening, particularly in this area, who may have been worried, there was a concern that if this building...
You mean in the New York City area?
Yes. There was a concern if this building fell that it would land on the center they had set up at Stuyvesant High School, where the students were still there. The reports from Stuyvesant High School now are that everybody there is okay.
Stuyvesant High School, the high school in the adjacent area, which the city and the state authorities set up to deal with the casualties that they could get out of the building or had occurred adjacent to the building. It is just clear that a lot of people, we do not know how many, got out of the building. And it is going to take time. It is going to take time. The New York City Office of Emergency Management, which monitors the city and all its vulnerable points, said when this whole thing began this morning, they could not get an immediate handle on precisely what was happening. And it was only, you've seen this before, this is a recording of precisely what happened when the second tower went down. And this is from a very long distance. This camera is located on the edge of the Hudson River on the West Side Drive, up the western side of Manhattan. And I cannot say this is something that people never believed they would see in the United States, because, of course, Oklahoma City was when we all had that reaction, when Americans experienced terrorism in the heartland for the first time, believing in many cases that it all happened somewhere else. But I just think that millions of Americans will be stunned by the magnitude of this today. I'm trying to track down John McWethy, our correspondent at the Pentagon. He was evacuated. I'm saying this as much to our control room as anybody. He, like everybody else, was evacuated. And I'd also like to talk, if I may, to Claire Shipman at the White House to see what the progression is there, and Linda Douglas at Capitol Hill, because we do know that the leadership of the Senate, at least,